with Patrick as always, and Austin is actually in the studio, which we never see. He's usually in the field, so we're excited to have him. Today we're here with Troy Milburn. He's a certified CASp inspector, which does ADA inspections and checks properties to see how they're going. And we're hoping that we can learn a lot from him today about ADA for your property, for properties that you manage, and how to protect yourself from these lawsuits that are apparently everywhere. So, hey, Troy, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, thanks.
So, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Not just the company, but like where you grew up, kind of your backstory.
We won't go that far back. I basically moved here from Utah probably about 30 years ago. Started out as in construction. I was a general contractor. Started with my father. We had a company we grew. I was a general contractor. My main client probably back then was KFC. So we were running around building, remodeling, doing conversions for the KFC, A&W, or Taco Bell. So they were doing the 2-in-1s for a while. We, basically just the commercial construction. And then, there was a time where, the Sacramento area started just getting hammered by the ADA lawsuits. And my client KFC was one of them, just like any other fast food. So it was kind of interesting that, since I had done all this work for them in construction, they would get me involved and on, trying to update their facilities. And so it was interesting that when that started, they had hired the gentleman. He was at the time, the CASp program wasn't around, and his title was, he had on his business card, a forensic architect. And, here I am, a young contractor, and I'm like, whoa, look at this guy pulling up in his sports car and dressed nice, and his forensic architect. And he's running around with his smart level and measuring stuff and checking stuff and showing me, and hey, yeah, this needs to be 8.3% slope, and this needs to be truncated domes, detectable warnings here and there. And, I kind of followed him around on a handful of projects. And then he started referring me as the contractor to do the work. And so I would be at one project, and the guy across the street would run over and say, hey, we just got a letter from Scott Johnson. We want to, can you come over and tell us what we need to do and help us out, And so I would be over there working on his something. Another guy would come up. Hey, you're the ADA guy. We need to talk to you and come over. And so I really kind of got involved in all of this through construction in the beginning. And eventually, we went through 2007, something like that. The economy took a dive. Construction business was just terrible at that point. And so I would go to businesses and they would ask, but the lawsuits were still coming. So the clients, they would, hey, tell us what we need to do, give us a price. And so I'd go there and write out everything and design. And then I'd give them the price to do it. And they'd take my designs and then give it to their nephew or their cousin or someone else, because they, to help them out and give them work. And I'm like, well, that kind of didn't work out for me. I just gave them all the answers to the test, so.
Yeah, we've had a lot of experience with that, actually.
Yeah. You get a lot of experience with that as contractors because, they're, you're telling them, a lot.
Yeah. Who's this guy, Scott? I think you said his name was?
Scott Johnson.
Oh.
Yeah. No, the Scott Johnson, he was one of the guys that, has a high number of lawsuits, the ADA lawsuits around, and most people have heard of him, especially in Sacramento, but he's literally terrorizing San Jose right now. Kind of moved his operations there, but there's many of.
What does someone like that do? Like, can you kind of explain to us, like, because I've heard of these guys before too. What do they actually do?
What do they do?
Well, a guy like Scott Johnson, like he kind of has an MO, right? He runs around and.
Yeah, I mean, he's changed his MO throughout the years. In the beginning, he basically would he had I don't know how much I can say about someone personally, but at the same time, I mean, he had a little team of people who would go around with him. They would take pictures of parking lots and curb ramps and signs and stuff like that, and then he would basically mail them a letter that was very, kind of an unofficial letter. I mean, it had a stamp on it and his name, and you open it up and said, we tried to visit your establishment. It was non-accessible. I'm going to file a lawsuit in 60 days if you don't reply back. And most people would just pay him cash, and then he would go away.
Yeah, we've actually heard of that a lot too. Is that a good move? Is that a good move for someone, or is that? I mean, if they just pay him, they're still liable, though, right? Like they're still not.
It didn't fix the barrier, but he just kind of went away, and so it was kind of they've changed the laws on how that can be done now. So those laws have changed, and so he can't just go filing or give a threatening letter to someone, and it literally a complaint has to be filed through the courts with a licensed attorney, and so they have skin in the game too. They have to pay the court fees, they have to pay all that stuff. So they can't just start throwing, letters in the mailboxes of every business and strong arm them for money. So they kind of changed it a little bit, but it's still out there. It's still rampant and difficult, and it probably even more difficult for the business owners once it does happen.
Okay.
What looking for when you show that?
Oh, let's not talk about him. Just in general, what would an inspector person like that look for when they show up at a project? Like, what's the first thing they're looking at?
So the first thing they look at is, the parking. In fact, the truth is they go on Google Earth and they could see most everything they need to see right off the bat. I mean, I get calls on a daily basis, and someone will, hey, I'm getting sued and don't understand why. And I'm like, well, what's your address? I look at, I can Google it, and I'm like, okay, yeah, well, I got a pretty good idea, what they're looking at. And because once they can see it, they write down the address and they just cruise down the street and can,
It's pretty easy from Google Earth to see if there's the domes, the 88
truncated domes. So it depends. It's funny. It's, it's funny. I'll go back to more of my intro a little bit too, because I kind of just jumped into the weeds. But at the same time, it is kind of funny because of Google Earth. You can you can see elements of what barriers they might face. So, like, say that I'm just using Scott Johnson as an example. He is a paraplegic. He's wheelchair bound, and so the barriers that affect him are steepness of ramps, change of elevations, door thresholds, pounds of pressure on doors, missing parking signs or non-compliant striping, stuff like that, because that's a mobility issue. There are also litigants out there, litigation from maybe someone who's visually impaired. And they're the ones that are more worried about the detectable warning, their truncated domes, the braille signs, and just general navigation of a building or a facility on how to safely get to in and out of a whatever it may be, whether it's a gas station or a restaurant or a hotel.
Yeah, I understand that. So it's really, it's just entrance and it's compliance to get handicapped people into the buildings is what they're looking for, which a lot of that can be seen from Google Earth. We look at when we're bidding a lot of these projects, and we can bid from Google Earth and kind of see what's out there and what they see before we even start the project. So it's real easy. So what can a property manager do, or what can someone do to protect themselves from these kinds of lawsuits or from?
So, I always tell people that your best protection is through compliance, right? If I were a property owner, I start on the outside, and and I'm getting my parking striping done. I'm installing my signs. I'm trying to
Getting
make
the
sure
path of travel.
path of travel from the public sidewalk to my door in the parking is as compliant as and good as I can possibly get, because that's where it all starts. They drive into the parking lot and they see it. Now they can get out of their car because they know there's going to be more items on the inside. And we can kind of get
Sorry,
into that a little
Sorry,
bit.
not to cut you off, but it kind of sounds like between a Google view and then a drive-by, I mean, they can kind of determine whether they even want to come look at you or not, right? I mean, if they
Absolutely.
do a Google view and you look good, you do a quick drive-by, I mean, someone's really got to dig to then go see if there's anything there's a problem with, right?
Right. So let's just say example. I mean, if someone pulls into a parking lot and they see the striping and signs and stuff like that, they might not even get out of their car. They're just going to drive into the next parking lot that doesn't have it. Because they're like, well, they're not going to get out and start checking the slopes and everything that detailed. They're looking for the easier target that, it's clearly obvious. We don't have to, waste too much
They can just kind of do it.
effort on that.
When you go out and do like if someone calls you out to their property, what do you come out? You come out and do and check the whole building? Like you do a whole report for them, or how does that work?
Yeah, it typically it depends, because sometimes I'm hired by the property owner and he's focusing on their common use areas, their parking, their and everything up to the door. And then business owners, typically they're responsible for their tenant improvement, they're everything on the inside. And and it kind of depends a little bit on how maybe their lease is drafted, but they'll a lot of times, sometimes I'll just do an exterior evaluation for a shopping center per se. And when I start at the public sidewalk and I'm checking the path of travel, run slopes, cross slopes, detectable warnings, signs. It leads me to their parking, and then I'm checking their striping and signs again, and curb ramps, slopes. Then go up to the doors and checking the thresholds, landings, and walkways and stuff like that. So that's kind of an exterior. Once we get on the inside, I'm checking. Some of the biggest lawsuits I've ever seen are door pressures and closing speeds. It's kind of crazy, because those things can actually cause maybe injury or. It's surprisingly, because you can, and you don't really think about it so much, that, even a big guy like me, I'll go up to a door and I'll pull it open, and, you're walking and you're kind of not completely on balance, and the door will be real heavy, and then you kind of just open it enough to squeeze through, and then it closes on you. Well, that's pretty tough if you're in a wheelchair. That'll get you, quite a bit. And then doors will smack people's fingers, or they'll knock them over, or one gentleman was 70 years old and he fights his way through one restroom door and he gets inside. Well, now it's a kind of a vestibule where there's another door where he's got to get into the actual restroom part. And so by the time he gets to that second door, he's so winded and exhausted, he faints and falls over, hits his head, and now you got a $3 million lawsuit on your hands. Which is way bigger than the other ones that are settling for 10 to 25, 30,000 or whatever they may be.
Wow.
But anyway, there's a lot to it.
Big. Sorry, that's pretty extreme with a really big price tag on a lawsuit like that, though. Well, I have kind of two questions. Like, what would an average lawsuit be for somebody, like, in value, and what compare that to what an average repair for at least part of your project to get like the outside done, or to have your doors checked, which seems to be the extreme thing? Like, price differential there?
Well, it's so hard. They vary. They vary so drastically. Let's just say, for example, we had a fast food mom and pop restaurant. They've got their typical 30 parking spaces in the entrance path of travel. Well, let's say that, for example, if they had called me in advance and we went out and did a CASp review or inspection on it, and I go through it all, and they can take my report, hand it to the contractor or to an architect or whatever, they may have, let's say in that a typical, they may have, say, $25,000 improvements, to fix a ramp, to fix the parking, redo some concrete and walkways to get up, install their signs. So they, say they have like a $25,000 on that. Well, if they get it wrapped up in a lawsuit, it's, between the attorney's fees and the settlements and all that stuff. And then that's, again, man, you just want to settle it and move on, because the people who try to like fight it and go on and on, they're just, it's goes through the roof. So I don't even know where the end limit is on some of these, but.
And then also, because I've done some reading on this also. So also, if you get sued, and even if you then settle, which I hear most of these ADA lawsuits end in settlement, you're still open for more lawsuits. It's not like it's over.
Well,
like,
part of the settlement is they'll say, okay, yeah, we'll settle this, but for X amount of money. But part of that settlement is you also have to agree to make your corrections, because because that kind of gets them out of being the ultimate bad guy. They can say, well, we're crusaders and we're trying to help the world by bringing attention to this. So and I don't want to sound like it's my slogan is protecting California businesses from ADA lawsuits, but on the other hand too, there's compassion and a need for the ADA in the first place. And so people with disabilities rely on these things. And in fact, even the elderly, or my mom and her brothers and sisters, they're all in their 80s, and they sure do appreciate a wider stall with grab bars in the bathroom, or close parking up near the building, and doors that don't slam on them and knock them over. So it's there's a certain definite need for all this, and it certainly is a necessity. And it would just be nice if there were a way to do it in advance and not
because you have to do it anyways after the lawsuit.
Yeah, and not have to deal with the lawsuit. But the problem is if there wasn't a threat or something out there, nobody would be doing it, because they don't want to spend their money, right?
The state has any grant programs available to help small businesses.
Do you know anything about any other grant programs for property managers or anything like
that? There's tax programs, and you'd probably I talk to your accountant about that sort of thing. But there's definitely tax incentives. And then the other thing I kind of wanted to mention too, like that mom and pop restaurant we talked about. Let's say they hired me in advance, and they're just like, hey, look, we're worried about this. What can we do? We'll give them the report. Let's say they spend that $25,000 on improvements. Well, is what that happened. That just did is also increase their property value. Or let's say the landlord or the business property owner, they put this money into it. It just increased their property value. They're going to get that money back at some point, for one. And then two, it makes it more attractive for other people to move in. And I mean, if I was moving into a business, and that's one of my notes here, is one of the reasons for an inspection is for like a pre-purchase of a building. If I'm going to buy this building or this property, I want to know what it is. If I got a pre-lease, for a pre-lease, I have a client that they moved in, they signed their lease, they moved into a building, and it was like an old Orchard Supply Hardware or Lowe's. I mean, the building was huge, and they were doing a kind of a
remodel, or
well, they were doing a facility that had for like gymnastics and stuff like that. So they dumped like $800,000 into this project, and they're pretty close to being done. And all of a sudden they got red tagged. The building department said, what are you doing? And how much is so then like, you need to get a CASp inspection. Well, the problem is they went for your tenant improvements, you have to spend at least 20% of your construction costs goes into ADA improvements.
Yeah.
And then unless your project goes over the valuation threshold of 180,000, and then you really don't have a limit on what you have to spend on your path of travel. So this guy who just spent $800,000, if you do the math on that, he's like, I don't have, $200,000 in my budget to redo this parking lot, and now my whole plan is done. It's shot. My budget's gone. I don't,
And you have a hard time opening. And at that point, you've been red tagged. They're not going to let you open. Like you can't get an occupancy.
And it was a bad day for them.
Yeah, no, I understand that. So I have a question for you. I think we're getting close on time here, but I got one more question that I want to ask you. So I did hear rumors back before that. So if I'm a property manager and I do get a CASp inspection, like say I have you come in and do an inspection, and after that point, someone comes in and says like, "Oh, you're not compliant," and they're talking about lawsuits. Does having this CASp inspection done show me taking the original steps to trying to remedy the situation and kind of protects me from lawsuits too, or is that just something that I made up or heard?
No, I mean there is definitely some protection for the value of having the CASp on that. There's there's a couple different types. So there's the 120-day notice. That's where I can go on a site. They basically, owner agrees in advance that we're going to, the CASp is going to come out here. He's going to give us a report, and we're going to fix everything in that report in 120 days. And then we'll get a reduction or a stay on our, on the lawsuit. Then there's others where you get 60 days to make your corrections. But again, some of this gets, I don't want to get too much into the technical stuff on it because it's a little more complex than I can really kind of get into in just a short time. But there is a value of that, gives you a little bit of time. That's of course, if the lawsuit's being filed in a state court as opposed to the federal court, because our protections for the CASp program is through the state. Sometimes they go through federal, and then there's some workarounds on that. But that's kind of that question kind of gets us a little bit into the weeds. But again, I always like to just say you get your protection through compliance. That's the best way, and get it done. Have a transition plan in place. So like my particular reports, we give you the report, and then there's a column for a fixed date on it. And so that, we also provide a spreadsheet so that they can kind of put a transition plan in place that shows that you're doing your barrier removal, and carries a lot of weight in the courts for that your intentions and your ability to do that. And we always start with the readily removable stuff.
A lot of that will take place after the fact, after the lawsuit's already been filed, obviously. But like you're saying, if you do this ahead of time, you stay on top of it, and you're making the steps, it goes a long way to protect it. And if you're compliant, you're protected.
So how do some of these property managers or anybody get a hold of you to have you take a look at their building?
So just I'll kind of circle back a little bit. Again, so we're certified ADA consultants. I'm CASp number 355. I think there's like over 1,300 of us now. Most of those guys work in the city or county, so they're not out running around doing the inspections. You might catch them on a weekend here or there. I've been there's almost 1,300. Like I said, I'm 355, and once it got to 356, I didn't really bother who's behind me. But we have our website. It's www.adacasp.com. Probably the best way to find us.
That's ADACASP.
Yeah, .com.
Perfect.
So pretty easy, and
I'm sure we'll have some links in here too. Yeah. On the podcast, we'll add them on. I wouldn't be surprised if it pops up in the window here in a second, anyways.
Okay. Yeah. Also, a phone number.
Questions, you can feel free to come on here. Go to the website, ask the questions there. Give us a call. Yeah,
we can get you in touch with Troy and check out your property, see where you're at. Like I said, we're just trying to bring value here to everybody else. There we go. That's all of your info right up there.
All right.
With your address, I knew it was coming. I appreciate it, Austin. You've been nonstop talking. So if you got anything you want to add in or questions you got?
I think I'm good. He kind of answered everything.
Yeah, that was pretty good. All right, Troy. Well, I appreciate the time. Thanks for spending some time talking to us today. I hope it brought some value to everybody else. They can kind of learn something. Maybe we can get some people protected and prevent some of these lawsuits. So don't forget to check us out on, that's your part. Where do we go? Instagram. Yeah.
Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, our website.
bm-builders.com. I look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks for our next podcast. Thanks everyone for tuning in.
Have a good day.